After a night with his mistress, his pregnant wife changed the locks and sent police to his office. The winter wind cut through the streets of Manhattan like a blade, rattling the windows of the Walker residence on the Upper East Side. Inside, the warm glow of candles flickered across an untouched dinner table, casting dancing shadows on the cream-colored walls that had once witnessed so much laughter. Jenny Walker sat motionless in her chair, her hand resting protectively over her 7-month pregnant belly. At 32, she still possessed the quiet elegance that had first caught John's attention 8 years ago, though now her hazel eyes held a weariness that seemed to age her beyond her years. The silk maternity dress she'd chosen so carefully that morning, hoping tonight would be different, now felt like a costume for a play she no longer wanted to perform in. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, each note echoing through the silence like a funeral bell. John should have been home hours ago. The roast she'd prepared with such care had long since grown cold. The wine she couldn't drink had been poured back into the bottle, and the candles had burned down to mere stubs. Her phone buzzed against the mahogany table. A text from John. "Working late again? Don't wait up. Love you. Love you." The words that once made her heart flutter now felt like paper cuts against her soul. Jenny stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She could respond with understanding, with patience, with the same forgiveness she'd offered countless times before. Instead, she simply turned the phone face down and placed both hands on her belly. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered to her unborn son. "Should Mommy keep pretending everything's okay?" The baby kicked as if responding to her question, and for the first time in months Jenny allowed herself to smile. It wasn't the practiced smile she wore when friends asked how married life was treating her, or the forced brightness she displayed when John's colleagues' wives made small talk at company events. This was different, raw, honest, and tinged with something she hadn't felt in a long time: determination. 20 blocks away, in the penthouse suite of the Meridian Hotel, John Walker was very much not working late. At 36, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never truly faced consequences for his actions. His dark hair was perfectly styled even in dishevelment, and his expensive suit lay crumpled on the floor beside the king-sized bed. Carrie Miller emerged from the bathroom wearing nothing but the hotel's plush white robe, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders like liquid fire. At 27, she possessed the kind of calculated beauty that turned heads in boardrooms and broke up marriages with equal efficiency. She'd chosen John Walker not for love but for opportunity, and tonight, like every night they'd spent together over the past 4 months, she was collecting on her investment. "Your wife texted again," Carrie said, nodding toward John's phone on the nightstand. Her voice carried a slight southern accent that she'd never quite managed to polish away, despite her best efforts to reinvent herself in New York. John glanced at his phone without really seeing it, then pulled Carrie down beside him on the Egyptian cotton sheets. "She's fine. Jenny's always been the understanding type." "The understanding type," Carrie repeated, tracing patterns on his chest with her manicured fingernails. "How convenient for you." "It is, isn't it?" John chuckled, completely missing the edge in her voice. "She never asks questions, never makes demands. Sometimes I think she'd forgive me for anything." Carrie's smile didn't reach her eyes. In her experience, the quiet ones were always the most dangerous when they finally reached their breaking point. But John Walker, for all his business acumen, was remarkably blind when it came to reading people, especially the women in his life. "Tell me about the promotion," she purred, changing the subject to safer ground. "When will Harrison make it official?" John's chest puffed with pride. "Next month, if everything goes according to plan. Senior partner at Blackstone and Associates. My own corner office, company car, the works." "And the salary increase?" "Substantial." John's hand moved to her thigh. "Enough to keep a certain beautiful woman very, very happy." What John didn't mention, what he'd conveniently forgotten in the haze of champagne and self-satisfaction, was that the promotion wasn't guaranteed, that his recent expense reports had raised eyebrows in accounting, that the hotel bills and jewelry purchases he'd been charging to the company credit card were starting to form a pattern that even the most lenient auditor couldn't ignore. But tonight, consequences felt as distant as the wife he'd left waiting at home. Back in the Walker residence, Jenny slowly climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. She paused at the threshold, looking at the king-sized bed she'd once shared with such hope and love. Now it felt like a monument to everything she'd lost. She moved to John's dresser and pulled open the top drawer. Beneath his monogrammed handkerchiefs and expensive cufflinks, Her fingers found what she was looking for, the receipt she'd discovered 2 weeks ago. Meridian Hotel, room service for two, champagne and strawberries, charged to their joint account. That night, as snow began to fall outside her window, Jenny Walker made a decision that would change everything. She would stop waiting. She would stop hoping. She would stop being the understanding wife. Tomorrow, she would become something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. The alarm clock shrieked at 6:30 a.m., but Jenny Walker had been awake for hours. She sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed in a navy blue maternity suit, her hands folded over her rounded belly as if protecting her unborn child from the storm she was about to unleash. The house felt different in the morning light, no longer a home, but a crime scene where her marriage had died a slow, painful death. Every photograph on the dresser, every shared memory embedded in the walls now felt like evidence of her own naivety. John stumbled through the front door at 7:15 a.m., his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled. His dark hair was disheveled, and he reeked of expensive perfume that definitely wasn't hers. He moved with the careless confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable, that his lies were bulletproof. "Morning, sweetheart," he called out, not even bothering to look at her as he headed straight for the coffee maker. "Sorry about last night. The Henderson contract ran longer than expected." Jenny watched him from the kitchen doorway, memorizing every detail of this moment, the way he avoided her eyes, the practiced ease of his deception, the complete absence of guilt in his voice. "The Henderson contract," she repeated quietly. "Nightmare of a negotiation. You know how it is." John poured his coffee, adding cream and sugar with the same mechanical precision he brought to everything in his life. "I'll probably have to work late again tonight. Maybe the whole week. Will you?" Something in her tone finally made him turn around. For a brief moment, his confident facade flickered as he took in her appearance. The careful makeup, the business attire, the way she held herself like a woman preparing for battle. "You look nice," he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Do you have a doctor's appointment today?" "No, John. Today I have a lawyer's appointment." The coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering against the Italian marble floor they'd chosen together during happier times. The dark liquid spread across the white stone like spilled blood. "What did you say?" Jenny reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Her hands were steady as she placed it on the granite countertop between them, a chasm that suddenly felt infinite. "Washington Reed from Reed & Associates. He's expecting you in his office at 10 o'clock this morning." John's face went through a series of transformations, confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "Jenny, what the hell is this about? If this is some kind of joke." "The Henderson contract," she interrupted, her voice calm as a frozen lake. "Funny thing about that. I called their office yesterday. They haven't negotiated with your firm in over 6 months. The color drained from John's face like water from a broken dam. "The Meridian Hotel," she continued, pulling out a credit card statement. "Room 2014. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months. Champagne, room service for two, late checkout fees, all charged to our joint account." John opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in their 8-year marriage, John Walker was speechless. "I know about Carrie Miller," Jenny said, and she watched him flinch as if she'd struck him. "I know about the jewelry you bought her with our money. I know about the weekend in the Hamptons you paid for while I was home with morning sickness. I know everything, John." "Jenny, listen to me." "No." The word cut through the air like a blade. "I'm done listening. I'm done waiting. I'm done pretending that the man I married still exists." She moved toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. John followed, his voice rising with desperation. "You can't just leave. We can work this out. Think about the baby." Jenny stopped, her hand on the doorknob. When she turned back to face him, her eyes held a coldness he'd never seen before. "I am thinking about the baby, John. That's exactly why I'm leaving." By 8:30 a.m., 3 different locksmith vans had arrived at the Walker residence. Jenny supervised from across the street, sitting in her Honda Civic with the engine running, watching as her carefully orchestrated plan unfolded with military precision. Washington Reed had been worth every penny of his substantial retainer. At 58, the silver-haired attorney had handled more high-profile divorces than anyone else in Manhattan, and he'd taken one look at John Walker's financial records and smiled like a shark that had smelled blood. "Your husband has been remarkably careless, Mrs. Walker," Washington had told her during their first meeting 3 days ago, "using company funds for personal expenses, falsifying expense reports, charging personal travel to business accounts. We have enough evidence to ensure he never works in finance again. Now, as she watched the locksmiths change every lock on the house she'd called home for 5 years, Jenny felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Control. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart? Marriage is about forgiveness." Jenny typed back. "Some things are unforgivable, Mom. This is one of them." Another text, this one from her sister Claire. "Do you need me to come over? I can be there in an hour." "I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm free." At 9:45 a.m., John's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Jenny watched from her car as he tried his key in the front door, then the back door, then stood in the driveway looking confused and increasingly panicked. He pulled out his phone and called her. She let it ring. He called again. She turned the phone off. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Jenny started her car and drove to Washington Reed's office, where she knew John would be waiting, and where he would finally understand that his world was about to collapse. The law offices of Reed and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, with panoramic views of Central Park that cost more per month than most people made in a year. Washington Reed's corner office was a monument to successful litigation, with leather-bound law books, crystal awards, and photographs of him shaking hands with judges and politicians. When Jenny arrived, she could hear John's voice through the closed door of the conference room. Loud, aggressive, demanding answers. She smiled. It was exactly what Washington had predicted. "Men like your husband," the lawyer had explained, "they're used to intimidating their way out of problems. They've never faced real consequences. When they finally do, they fall apart completely." Washington emerged from the conference room, closing the door behind him with practiced calm. "He's not taking it well," he said with professional understatement. "He's demanding to know where you are, threatening to sue me for unlawful imprisonment, which is particularly amusing since he came here voluntarily. Is he ready to hear the terms?" "I believe so, though I should warn you, Mrs. Walker, he's going to fight this. Men like John Walker don't go down quietly." Jenny adjusted her purse strap and straightened her shoulders. "Let him fight. I'm not the same woman he married, Mr. Reed, and he's about to find that out." As she walked toward the conference room where her husband waited, Jenny felt her son kick inside her belly, a strong, determined movement that felt like approval. Today was the day John Walker would learn that actions have consequences. And tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. The conference room at Reed and Associates felt like a gladiator arena, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a mahogany table that had witnessed the destruction of countless marriages. John Walker sat at one end, his usually perfect posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who was beginning to understand the magnitude of his situation. When Jenny entered the room, John's head snapped up like a man grasping for a lifeline. For a moment, his face softened with what might have been relief, or perhaps the desperate hope that this was all an elaborate bluff. "Jenny, thank God. Tell this man there's been some kind of mistake." She took the seat directly across from him, her movements deliberate and controlled. Between them, Washington Reed spread out a collection of documents like a dealer laying down winning cards. "There's no mistake, John," Jenny said quietly. "The only mistake was thinking you were clever enough to hide what you were doing." John's lawyer, a nervous young man named Bradley Hoffman, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Walker, perhaps we can discuss this civilly. My client is willing to consider marriage counseling." "Your client," Washington interrupted smoothly, "has been embezzling company funds to finance an extramarital affair. Civility is no longer on the table." He slid a manila folder across to Bradley. "Bank records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and GPS tracking data from Mr. Walker's company vehicle. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 months, he drove to the Meridian Hotel instead of the client meetings he claimed to be attending." John's face went white as he recognized the implications. "GPS tracking? That's invasion of privacy. Company vehicle, company rules," Washington replied. "Your wife was very thorough in her research." Jenny watched her husband's face cycle through emotions. Anger, fear, desperation, and finally, a calculating coldness she'd never seen before. This was the moment she truly understood that the man she'd married was gone, replaced by someone willing to say anything to save himself. "Fine," John said, leaning back in his chair with forced confidence. "So I made some mistakes. But Jenny, you're 7 months pregnant. You need me. The baby needs a father. Are you really going to destroy our family over this?" "You destroyed our family the first night you chose her over us," Jenny replied without hesitation. "I'm just making it official." Bradley shuffled through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. "Mr. Walker, I need to speak with you privately." "No." John slammed his hand on the table. "I want to hear what she wants." "What's this really about, Jenny? Money? You want to take me for everything I have?" Washington smiled like a shark. "Actually, Mr. Walker, that's exactly what we're going to do." He opened another folder, revealing financial statements and asset valuations. "The house purchased during your marriage with joint funds, Mrs. Walker's entitled to half. Your investment portfolio, built with marital assets, again, half goes to your wife. Your retirement accounts, your life insurance policies, even your precious BMW, all subject to equitable distribution. But that's not the interesting part," Washington continued, clearly enjoying himself. "The interesting part is what happens when Blackstone and Associates discovers that their soon-to-be senior partner has been using company resources to fund his personal life." John's confident facade cracked completely. "You can't. Jenny, you wouldn't." "I already did." Jenny's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I called Harrison Blackstone personally yesterday morning. I thought he should know where his money was really going." The silence that followed was deafening. John stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You called Harrison?" he whispered. "I did more than call him, John. I provided him with copies of every receipt, every false expense report, every lie you told to cover your tracks. He was very interested to learn about your creative accounting methods." Bradley was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how quickly he could extract himself from this disaster. "Mrs. Walker, perhaps we should discuss settlement terms." "Oh, we will," Washington said. "But first, let's talk about child support. Mr. Walker, assuming you still have employment after today, you'll be paying 18% of your gross income until the child reaches 18, plus half of all medical expenses, educational costs, and extracurricular activities. And if you don't have employment," Jenny added quietly, "you'll still owe the same amount. The court doesn't care if you're unemployed by choice or consequence." John's hands were shaking now. "Jenny, please. We can work this out. I'll end things with Carrie, I'll go to counseling, I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't destroy my career." For the first time since entering the room, Jenny's composure cracked slightly. A flash of pain crossed her face. Not for the man sitting across from her, but for the memory of who he used to be. "You should have thought about your career before you decided to steal from your company to impress your girlfriend," she said. "You should have thought about our marriage before you chose to betray it. You should have thought about our son before you decided he wasn't worth your fidelity." She stood up, her hand protectively covering her belly. "But you didn't think, John. You just took what you wanted and assumed there would never be consequences." 20 minutes later, Jenny stood alone in the elevator, watching the floors tick by as she descended from the 32nd floor. Her phone buzzed with a text from Washington. "Harrison Blackstone wants to meet with you tomorrow. He's impressed by your documentation and wants to discuss hiring you as a financial consultant for their divorce cases." She almost laughed. Even in the midst of destroying her marriage, she was somehow building a new career. Another text, this one from an unknown number. "We need to talk. C. Carrie." Even in her current state of vindictive satisfaction, Jenny felt a chill. The other woman was clearly panicking, probably realizing that her meal ticket was about to be canceled permanently. Jenny deleted the message without responding. Whatever Carrie Miller wanted to say, it was far too late. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Jenny caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized. Stronger, harder, more dangerous than the naive wife who'd lit candles and waited for her husband to come home. She liked this new version of herself. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual chaotic energy. People rushed past on the sidewalk, lost in their own dramas and disasters, completely unaware that Jenny Walker had just rewritten the script of her life. Her phone rang. John's name appeared on the screen. She let it ring until it stopped, then turned off the phone completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But today, she had won the first major victory in a war she never wanted to fight but was determined to win. The consequences were just beginning. Harrison Blackstone's corner office on the 42nd floor of the Chrysler Building was a testament to old money and older power. At 63, the founding partner of Blackstone and Associates commanded respect through reputation alone, and his steel-gray eyes had seen enough corporate scandals to recognize one from across the room. John Walker sat in the leather chair across from Harrison's massive desk, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled after a sleepless night. His tie was crooked, His shirt wrinkled, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to maintain what was left of his professional composure. $37,000, Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. He didn't look up from the file spread across his desk. That's how much you've stolen from this company over the past 4 months. Stolen is a strong word. Is it? Harrison's eyes snapped up, pinning John like a butterfly to a board. What would you call using company credit cards to pay for hotel rooms where you conducted personal affairs? What would you call falsifying expense reports to cover champagne dinners with your mistress? What would you call charging weekend getaways to our travel budget while claiming to meet with clients who haven't spoken to us in months? John opened his mouth, but no words came out. Every excuse he'd rehearsed during the long night sounded pathetic in the harsh light of Harrison's office. Your wife brought me documentation that would make the IRS weep with joy, Harrison continued. Bank statements, hotel receipts, GPS tracking data from your company vehicle. She even provided recordings of phone calls where you lied to clients about your whereabouts while you were playing house with Miss Miller. Recordings? John's voice cracked. Apparently she's been more observant than you gave her credit for. Harrison closed the file with a sharp snap. 28 years, John. That's how long I've been building this firm's reputation. I've weathered recessions, scandals, and corporate upheavals. But I've never had an employee steal from me to fund an extramarital affair. John tried one last desperate gambit. Harrison, I know this looks bad, but I can explain. Can you explain this? Harrison slid a photograph across the desk. It showed John and Carrie entering the Meridian Hotel, his hand on her lower back, both of them laughing. The timestamp showed it was taken on a Tuesday afternoon, when John was supposed to be in a client meeting. Where did you? Hotel security cameras. Your wife requested the footage as part of her divorce proceedings. Imagine my surprise when she shared it with me as evidence of corporate fraud. The photograph hit John like a physical blow. In it, he looked exactly like what he was, a middle-aged man having a midlife crisis, oblivious to how pathetic he appeared. I want your resignation letter on my desk by noon, Harrison said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. Clean out your office. Security will escort you out. And John, if you try to take any client files or proprietary information, I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage. What about my partnership track? The promotion we discussed? Harrison's laugh was devoid of humor. The promotion? John, you're lucky I'm not pressing criminal charges. The only reason I'm letting you resign instead of firing you is professional courtesy, and the fact that your wife asked me to show mercy. That last revelation hit harder than anything else. Even in her anger, even after everything he'd done, Jenny had tried to protect him. The knowledge of her undeserved kindness made him feel smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. Across town, Carrie Miller paced the cramped studio apartment she'd been renting since her roommate situation had imploded 2 months ago. The space felt even smaller today, the walls closing in as she processed the devastating news she'd received that morning. Her phone buzzed with yet another call from her landlord, Mr. Kowalski. She'd been dodging him for a week, but the man was persistent. Miss Miller, his gravelly voice carried through the voicemail, your rent was due 5 days ago. If I don't receive payment by tomorrow, I'll be starting eviction proceedings. Carrie threw the phone onto her unmade bed and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above her dresser. The woman looking back at her was still beautiful, still young, but there was something desperate in her eyes now, the look of someone who'd bet everything on the wrong horse. Her carefully laid plans were crumbling. John was supposed to be her ticket to a better life, her escape from the endless cycle of dead-end jobs and studio apartments. She'd invested 4 months in seducing him, playing the perfect mistress, sexy but not slutty, sophisticated but not intimidating, ambitious but not threatening. Now it was all falling apart, and she could feel the walls of her old life closing in around her. Her phone rang again. This time it was John. What the hell did you do? His voice was raw with panic and rage. What are you talking about? Carrie tried to inject innocence into her voice, but it came out hollow. Don't play dumb with me. Someone sent Harrison photos of us at the hotel. Professional surveillance photos, Carrie. Who else could have done that besides you? Are you insane? Why would I sabotage my own relationship? Maybe because you're not getting what you want out of it? Maybe because you decided to cut your losses and cash out? Carrie's mind raced. She hadn't sent any photos to Harrison Blackstone, but John's paranoia gave her an idea. A dangerous, desperate idea that might be her only way out of this mess. John, listen to me carefully, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I didn't send those photos, but I know who did, and I know how to prove it. What are you talking about? Meet me tonight. Usual place. I have something that will change everything. At 3:30 p.m., John Walker walked out of Blackstone and Associates for the last time, carrying his personal belongings in a cardboard box, while a security guard followed 2 steps behind. The lobby that had once felt like his kingdom now felt like a gauntlet of judgment. Every colleague who saw him tried to look away, but he caught their whispered conversations, their knowing glances. By tomorrow, the entire legal community in Manhattan would know that John Walker had been fired for embezzlement and adultery. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother. Heard what happened. Couch is available if you need a place to stay. The humiliation was complete. In less than 48 hours, he'd lost his wife, his home, his career, and his reputation. All because he'd thought he was smarter than everyone else, that he could have his cake and eat it too. As he walked toward the subway, his BMW having been repossessed that morning as a company vehicle, John realized that his troubles were just beginning. Jenny wanted a divorce. Carrie was playing games he didn't understand, and he was about to become a single, unemployed father with no income and crushing debt. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he could still find a way to turn this around. That voice was about to lead him into the biggest mistake of his life. The Meridian Hotel bar looked different at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night. The after-work crowd had thinned out, leaving behind the kind of people who had nowhere else to go. Business travelers nursing their loneliness, and locals avoiding whatever waited for them at home. John Walker had become one of those people. He sat in the same corner booth where he'd once felt like a king, but now the burgundy leather felt like a confessional. His third whiskey sat untouched in front of him, the ice long since melted into a watery amber pool that reflected his fractured life. Carrie arrived 20 minutes late, her entrance no longer commanding the attention it once had. Her designer dress, the one he'd bought her with company money, hung differently on her frame, and there were shadows under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. "You look terrible," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thanks. Really what I needed to hear right now." Carrie signaled the bartender for a wine, then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "John, I know how to fix this, all of it." He looked up from his glass, hope and skepticism warring in his eyes. "Fix what exactly? My career is over, my wife hates me, I'm sleeping on my brother's couch, and I owe $37,000 to a company that wants to press charges. That's exactly what I'm talking about." Carrie pulled out her phone and showed him a series of text messages. "Your wife has been planning this for weeks, John. This wasn't some spontaneous reaction to discovering your affair. This was calculated, premeditated destruction." John squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The messages appeared to be between Jenny and someone named M, discussing surveillance, financial records, and legal strategies. "Where did you get these?" "I have my sources." Carrie's smile was sharp as a blade. "The point is, she set you up. This whole thing was a trap, and you walked right into it." John's mind raced. If Jenny had been planning this for weeks, that meant she knew about us before the hotel receipts. She knew before I ever got careless. Exactly. And that means she was gathering evidence while pretending everything was fine. She was lying to you just as much as you were lying to her. For a moment, John felt a surge of righteous anger. How dare Jenny play games while he was? But the thought died as quickly as it formed. Even in his desperation, he couldn't quite convince himself that his lies and hers were equivalent. "What's your point, Carrie?" "My point is that we can prove she orchestrated this whole thing. We can show that she violated your privacy, that she manipulated evidence, that she conspired to destroy your career out of spite rather than genuine concern for the company's welfare." John wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe that there was a way out of this nightmare, that he could somehow be the victim instead of the villain. And how exactly do we prove that? Carrie's eyes glittered with something that might have been excitement or madness. "We break into her phone, get the original messages, the communication with her lawyer, everything. Then we show Harrison that his star witness is actually a vindictive ex-wife who manufactured evidence. That's," John started to say insane, but stopped himself. Was it really more insane than the situation he was already in? "It's our only chance," Carrie pressed. "John, in 3 days, I'm going to be evicted from my apartment. My credit cards are maxed out, and the only job I can get is waiting tables at a diner in Queens." Is that really how you want this story to end? 40 blocks away, Jenny Walker sat in the nursery she'd been preparing for her son, carefully folding tiny onesies and arranging them in the antique dresser her mother had bought. The room was painted a soft sage green, with white furniture and whimsical animal prints that made her smile even in her current circumstances. Her phone buzzed with a call from Washington Reed. "How are you holding up?" the lawyer asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. "Better than I expected, actually. I cleaned out John's home office today. Found some interesting things. More evidence? More like confirmation of what I already suspected. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals I never knew about. Receipts for jewelry that never appeared in our house. Credit card bills for restaurants I've never been to." Jenny's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. The man was living a double life for months, possibly years. I was just too trusting to see it. "Don't blame yourself for his choices, Jenny. You acted with the information you had. I know that, but I also know I'll never be that naive again." After hanging up, Jenny moved to the window that overlooked the small garden behind her house. The roses John had planted for their 5th anniversary were blooming despite everything, their red petals bright against the evening sky. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. He was active tonight, as if sensing the upheaval in his mother's life. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "Mommy's got everything under control now." But even as she said the words, something nagged at her, a feeling that the storm wasn't over yet, that John's desperation might drive him to do something even more destructive than adultery and embezzlement. Back at the Meridian Hotel, John and Carrie huddled over her phone, scrolling through what she claimed were Jenny's messages. In the dim lighting of the bar, it was hard to see clearly, but the implications seemed damning enough. "When do we do this?" John asked, hating himself for the question but unable to stop the words from coming out. "Tomorrow night. She has her prenatal appointment at 3 p.m., then dinner with her sister at 7. That gives us a 4-hour window to get into the house and find her phone." "How do you know her schedule?" Carrie's smile was enigmatic. "I told you, I have my sources." John stared into his watery whiskey, seeing his reflection distorted in the amber liquid. 2 weeks ago, he'd been a respected attorney on the partnership track. Now he was planning to break into his estranged wife's house to steal evidence that might not even exist. "This is crazy," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Crazy is letting her destroy your life without fighting back," Carrie replied. "Crazy is giving up when you still have cards to play." She reached across the table and took his hand, her touch warm and familiar. "John, we can still win this. We can still have the life we planned together, but only if you're willing to fight for it." As John looked into Carrie's eyes, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In his desperation to reclaim some control, to find some way to be the victim rather than the villain, he chose to trust the woman who had already proven she would do anything to get what she wanted. He chose to believe that breaking into his pregnant wife's home to steal her phone was somehow justified. It was, as he would soon discover, the biggest mistake he would ever make. Thursday evening came with the kind of autumn rain that soaked through everything, turning Manhattan's streets into rivers of reflected neon. John Walker sat in his rented Honda Civic, his brother's old car, a humiliating step down from the BMW he'd lost, watching his own house from across the street like a common criminal. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he'd driven up this same driveway in his company car, confident and entitled. Now he was hiding behind rain-streaked windows, waiting to break into the home he'd once shared with the woman who'd trusted him completely. Carrie sat beside him, her presence both comforting and nauseating. She'd dressed in black like they were planning a heist, which John supposed they were. "Her car's gone," Carrie said, checking her watch. "Dinner with her sister started 20 minutes ago. We have at least 2 hours." John's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. "What if the neighbors see us? You lived here for 5 years, John. You have every right to be here. Just act natural." Natural. The word felt foreign in his mouth. Nothing about his life felt natural anymore. They waited another 10 minutes to be sure Jenny was really gone, then crossed the street in the rain. John fumbled with the spare key hidden under the fake rock by the back door, a hiding spot he'd suggested years ago when they were young and trusting, and believed they'd grow old together in this house. The key still worked. Jenny hadn't thought to check the backup hiding spots. Inside, the house felt like a museum of his former life. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, but somehow foreign, like looking at a movie set designed to recreate a life he'd once lived. The smell of vanilla candles and the lavender soap Jenny loved hung in the air, making his chest tight with regret. "Focus," Carrie whispered, though her voice carried an edge of excitement that made John's skin crawl. "Phone first, then any documents she might have hidden." They started in the master bedroom. John felt like a trespasser as he opened dresser drawers he'd once shared, rifling through clothes that smelled like the woman he'd betrayed. Carrie was less sentimental, efficiently searching through Jenny's jewelry box and nightstand. "Here," Carrie said, holding up Jenny's iPad. "This might have the messages backed up." John took the tablet with shaking hands, feeling the weight of his final betrayal. If there had been any doubt about what kind of man he'd become, this moment erased it completely. The iPad was password protected, but John knew Jenny well enough to try their anniversary date. It didn't work. He tried their wedding date, then her birthday, then the due date of their baby. Nothing. "Try the baby's name," Carrie suggested. "We haven't chosen one yet." The lie came automatically. They had chosen a name, Lucas, after Jenny's grandfather, but John wasn't about to share that intimate detail with Carrie. What about her mother's maiden name? Social security number? Something sentimental? John tried a few more combinations, his anxiety growing with each failed attempt. How well did he really know his wife? Had she always been this careful with passwords and he'd just never noticed? They moved to Jenny's home office, a small room where she paid bills and handled their household administration. John had rarely paid attention to this space during their marriage, dismissing it as Jenny's domain. Now looking at her meticulously organized files and color-coded calendar, he realized how much of their life she'd managed while he'd been focused on his career, and, later, his affair. "Look at this," Carrie said, holding up a manila folder labeled Legal Documentation. Inside were copies of bank statements, credit card bills, and expense reports. All the evidence Jenny had gathered against him. John stared at the papers, seeing months of careful documentation. Every lie he'd told, every false expense claim, every hotel receipt. It was all there, organized chronologically with meticulous precision. "She's been watching me for months," he whispered. "Exactly. This proves she was planning to destroy you long before she confronted you. This is premeditated character assassination." But as John looked closer at the dates, a different picture emerged. The earliest documentation was from January, but his affair with Carrie had started in December. Jenny hadn't been planning his destruction. She'd been trying to understand why her husband was lying to her. "John, we need to find her phone," Carrie pressed. "These documents aren't enough. We need the messages that show she was coordinating with lawyers and investigators." They searched the kitchen, the living room, the nursery that was almost ready for their son. With each room they violated, John felt a piece of his soul cracking away. This was his child's future home, and he was ransacking it like a common thief. Finally, they found Jenny's phone charging on the kitchen counter. John picked it up with hands that were now visibly shaking. "Same password issue," he said after trying several combinations. "Let me try," Carrie said, taking the phone. She seemed oddly confident, as if she knew something John didn't. After a few attempts, the phone unlocked. John stared at her. "How did you—" "Lucky guess," Carrie said quickly, but her eyes didn't meet his. She scrolled through Jenny's messages with practiced efficiency, screenshotting conversations with lawyers, doctors, and family members. John watched, feeling increasingly sick as Carrie invaded his wife's privacy with obvious enjoyment. Then Carrie stopped scrolling. Her face went pale. "What is it?" John asked. Carrie turned the phone toward him, showing a message thread between Jenny and someone labeled Detective Morrison. The messages were recent, from earlier that afternoon. "Jenny, he's getting desperate. Carrie's been pressuring him to do something stupid. Detective Morrison, we're ready. If they try to break in, we'll have them on multiple charges. Breaking and entering, theft, violation of restraining order. Jenny, I hate that it's come to this, but I have to protect my son. Detective Morrison, you're doing the right thing. Some people only learn through consequences." John's blood turned to ice. "Restraining order?" Carrie was already moving toward the back door. "We need to leave, now." "What restraining order?" John demanded, following her. "The one Jenny filed yesterday afternoon," Carrie said, not slowing down. "The one that legally prohibits you from being within 500 feet of this house." John stopped dead in his tracks. "You knew? You knew and you still convinced me to come here?" Carrie turned back to him, and for the first time he saw her without the mask of seduction and manipulation. Her face was cold, calculating, and completely without remorse. "I needed you to violate the restraining order, John. I needed you to get arrested. Why? Because I'm not going down alone for this mess. If I'm going to lose everything, so are you." In the distance, John could hear sirens approaching. Blue and red lights flickered through the rain-soaked windows. As the reality of his situation hit him, John Walker finally understood that he'd been played from the very beginning, not just by his wife, but by the woman he'd thrown away everything to be with. He'd lost his marriage, his career, his home, and his reputation. Now he was about to lose his freedom. The Tombs, officially known as the Manhattan Detention Complex, was exactly as grim as John Walker had imagined, but worse than he'd ever feared he'd experience firsthand. The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over concrete walls that had witnessed more human misery than any building should. John sat on the metal bench in holding cell C4, still wearing the rain-soaked clothes from his failed break-in 12 hours earlier. His suit, once a symbol of his professional success, now hung on him like a costume from a play he no longer wanted to be in. The other men in the cell gave him a wide berth. Even in this place, something about him screamed, "Doesn't belong here," which, paradoxically, made him more of a target rather than less. The businessman who'd lost everything was as foreign to this environment as a tourist in a war zone. "Walker!" The guard's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "Your lawyer's here." John looked up to see Bradley Hoffman approaching, his young face pale and drawn. The kid looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week, a common side effect of representing John Walker, apparently. "How bad is it?" John asked as soon as they were seated in the cramped attorney-client meeting room. Bradley opened his briefcase with hands that trembled slightly. Breaking and entering, violation of a restraining order, attempted theft, and... He paused, swallowing hard. "Stalking." "Stalking? Your wife's lawyer provided evidence that you'd been monitoring her movements for weeks. Apparently Miss Miller had been feeding you information about your wife's schedule, her appointments, her routines. The district attorney is treating it as a coordinated stalking campaign." John felt the world spinning around him. "Where is Carrie? What did she tell them?" Bradley's expression grew even more uncomfortable. That's the other problem, John. Miss Miller disappeared." "What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean she's gone, vanished. Her apartment was cleaned out, her phone disconnected, her social media accounts deleted. It's like she never existed." The implications hit John like a physical blow. Carrie had planned this. All of it. The messages on Jenny's phone, the information about her schedule, the pressure to break into the house. It had all been designed to destroy him completely. "She played me," he whispered. "It gets worse," Bradley continued. "The police found evidence in her apartment before she disappeared. Financial records showing she'd been blackmailing married men for months. You weren't her first target, John. You were just the latest." John buried his face in his hands. "How many others?" "At least 3 that they've identified so far. All successful, all married, all completely destroyed when she was done with them." Across town, Jenny Walker sat in her obstetrician's office, looking at the ultrasound image of her son. At 8 months pregnant, she could see his features clearly now. The slope of his nose, the curve of his chin. He looked like her father, she thought, and felt grateful for that small mercy. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Amanda Torres said, smiling as she cleaned the gel off Jenny's belly. "He's a good size. Heartbeat is strong, and he's positioned well for delivery. How are you feeling?" "Physically, great. Emotionally," Jenny paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's complicated, Doctor." Torres had been her obstetrician for all 3 pregnancies, the 2 miscarriages that had nearly broken her spirit, and now this miracle baby who'd arrived just as her marriage was imploding. "I heard about your husband," Dr. Torres said gently. "I'm sorry you're going through this, especially now." "Actually, I'm not sorry," Jenny said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm relieved. For the first time in months, I can breathe again." It was true. Despite everything, the divorce proceedings, the media attention from John's arrest, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, Jenny felt lighter than she had in years. "My mother keeps asking when I'm going to forgive him," she continued, "when I'm going to think about the baby and try to work things out. But I am thinking about the baby. I'm thinking about what kind of man I want my son to see as his role model." Dr. Torres nodded thoughtfully. "And John doesn't fit that description anymore?" "The John I married never existed," Jenny said quietly. "I created a fantasy version of him in my mind, and I held on to that fantasy even when reality kept contradicting it. But my son deserves better than a mother who teaches him that love means accepting betrayal and lies." The story broke on page 6 of the New York Post 3 days later. Wall Street wife's revenge. Pregnant attorney catches husband in $1 million affair scam. The article was surprisingly sympathetic to Jenny. painting her as a brave woman who'd outsmarted her cheating husband and exposed a wider criminal conspiracy. Carrie Miller was described as a black widow who'd targeted successful men across Manhattan, bleeding them dry before disappearing into thin air. John, meanwhile, was portrayed exactly as he deserved to be, a fool who'd thrown away everything for a woman who'd been playing him from day one. The legal community buzzed with the scandal. Harrison Blackstone gave a carefully worded statement about how the firm was cooperating fully with authorities and had immediately terminated Walker upon discovering his criminal activities. But the real impact was felt in the quieter corners of John's world. The country club where his membership was quietly revoked, the private school where his name was removed from the alumni newsletter, the social circles where he was no longer welcome. "He was always so arrogant," Martha Pemberton whispered to her tennis partner, "acting like he was better than everyone else. I guess we know what he was really up to all those late nights." "Poor Jenny," her partner replied, "pregnant and having to deal with this humiliation. Though I have to say she's handling it with remarkable grace." Back in his cell, John stared at the newspaper article Bradley had brought him. His photograph, a professional headshot from better days, sat next to a grainy security camera image of him entering the Meridian Hotel with Carrie. The contrast was devastating. "The good news," Bradley said, "is that the prosecutor is willing to discuss a plea bargain. With Carrie Miller's disappearance, some of the charges are harder to prove." "What kind of plea?" 6 months in minimum security, 5 years probation, community service, and full restitution to Blackstone and Associates." Bradley paused. "Plus a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting your wife or child for the duration of your probation." John felt something break inside his chest. "I won't be able to see my son for 5 years? If you go to trial and lose, you could be looking at 5 years in state prison. You'd miss even more of his childhood." The choice was no choice at all. John had gambled everything and lost, and now he would spend the first 5 years of his son's life as a cautionary tale rather than a father. "There's something else," Bradley added quietly. "Your wife's lawyer reached out. She's willing to allow supervised visitation after you complete your sentence and undergo court-mandated therapy." "Supervised visitation," John repeated. The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. "It's more than she has to offer, John. After everything you've put her through, it's remarkably generous." John nodded, understanding finally that mercy from Jenny was more than he deserved. She could have destroyed him completely, could have ensured he never saw his child at all. Instead, she was offering him a path back to redemption, narrow, difficult, and years in the future, but still a path. For the first time since his arrest, John Walker cried, not for himself, but for the man he could have been, and for the son who would grow up knowing his father only as a cautionary tale about the consequences of betrayal. The first cry of Lucas Walker echoed through the delivery room at Mount Sinai Hospital at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November. Jenny held her son for the first time, tears streaming down her face as she looked into the dark eyes that were unmistakably her own. "He's perfect," whispered her sister Claire, who had been Jenny's birth partner when John couldn't be there, when John wasn't allowed to be there due to the restraining order. Dr. Torres smiled as she completed the delivery procedures. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, 21 inches long, a very healthy boy. Jenny traced her finger along Lucas's tiny hand, marveling at his perfect fingernails, his rosebud mouth, the way he seemed to study her face with serious concentration. "Hi, sweet boy," she whispered. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you." Lucas wrapped his tiny fingers around hers with surprising strength, and Jenny felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This love was different from anything she'd ever experienced. Fierce, protective, and unconditional in a way that made her previous understanding of love seem shallow by comparison. "Have you decided about—" Claire gestured vaguely, not wanting to speak John's name in this sacred moment. "I'll call the lawyer tomorrow," Jenny said quietly. "He has a right to know his son was born safely, but that's all he gets for now." The choice felt both generous and self-protective. Lucas deserved to have a father who knew he existed, but he also deserved to be protected from a father who wasn't ready to put his child's needs first. 2 hours later, while Jenny dozed with Lucas in her arms, her phone buzzed with a text from Washington Reed. "Congratulations on your son's birth. I've notified John's attorney as discussed. He's requested permission to send a gift for the baby. Your decision." Jenny stared at the message for a long time. The old Jenny, the woman who'd waited with cold dinners and lit candles, might have said yes. She might have seen it as a first step toward healing, toward the family reconciliation that everyone seemed to expect. But the new Jenny, the woman who'd learned to protect herself and fight for what mattered, understood that gifts from prison weren't about the baby. They were about John's need to feel better about himself, to maintain some connection to the life he'd destroyed. She texted back, "No gifts. When he's ready to be a real father instead of a guilty one, we can discuss supervised visitation after his release." 6 months later, the spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms through Central Park as Jenny pushed Lucas's stroller along the winding paths. At 6 months old, he was a happy, alert baby who smiled at strangers and babbled constantly, as if practicing for all the conversations they would have in the years to come. "He looks just like you," said Alan Blake, the pediatric nurse Jenny had been dating for 2 months. Alan was nothing like John. Quiet where John had been bombastic. Steady where John had been unpredictable. Content with simple pleasures where John had always needed more. "Thank God for that," Jenny laughed, adjusting Lucas's sun hat. They'd met at a new mother's support group that Jenny had joined more for social connection than emotional support. Alan had been there with his sister, who was struggling with postpartum depression, and he'd offered to hold Lucas when the baby got fussy during the session. "You're a natural," Jenny had said, watching Alan gently bounce Lucas until he settled. "4 nieces and nephews," Alan had replied with a shy smile. "You learn or you get kicked out of family gatherings." Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. Jenny had been clear from the beginning about her situation, about the complications that came with dating a woman whose husband was in prison for stalking her. Alan had listened without judgment, then asked if he could take her to dinner the following week. "Only if you're sure you understand what you're getting into," she'd warned. "I understand that you're a woman who fought for her child and won," he'd replied. "That's not a red flag. That's impressive." Now 6 months into their cautious courtship, Jenny was beginning to believe that not all men were like John. Some men actually meant what they said. Some men followed through on their promises. Some men chose honesty over convenience. "There's something I need to tell you," Alan said as they settled on a bench overlooking the reservoir. Jenny's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. In her experience, conversations that started this way ended with revelations about other women, hidden debts, or secret addictions. "Okay," she said, unconsciously pulling Lucas's stroller closer. Alan turned to face her fully, his expression serious but warm. "I love you, both of you, and I know it's early, and I know your situation is complicated, but I needed you to know how I feel." Jenny stared at him, waiting for the catch, the condition, the hidden agenda. But Alan just sat there, patient and steady, waiting for her response without pressure or manipulation. She started, then stopped. The old Jenny would have immediately reciprocated, would have rushed to reassure him and make him feel secure. The new Jenny had learned to sit with her feelings, to examine them carefully before speaking. "I care about you too," she said finally, "more than I expected to. But Alan, I need you to understand. Lucas and I come as a package deal. We always will. And if that's not what you want, that's exactly what I want," he interrupted gently. "I want to be part of your family, if you'll have me. Not to replace anyone or fix anything, but just to love you both and help build something good together." Lucas chose that moment to reach out from his stroller, making grabbing motions toward Alan with his chubby hands. Alan scooped him up without hesitation, settling the baby on his lap while Lucas explored his jacket buttons with intense concentration. "See?" Alan said, grinning as Lucas babbled at him. "He approves." That evening, after Alan had gone home and Lucas was asleep in his crib, Jenny sat in her living room with a cup of tea and opened the letter that had arrived that morning from John's prison counselor. "Dear Mrs. Walker, John has asked me to reach out regarding his progress in our rehabilitation program. He has completed anger management classes, financial responsibility counseling, and individual therapy focused on understanding the impact of his choices on his family. He would like you to know that he takes full responsibility for the destruction of your marriage and the trauma he caused you and your son. He is not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, but he hopes that someday he might be allowed to contribute positively to Lucas's life in whatever capacity you deem appropriate. John has also asked me to tell you that seeing the photographs you sent of Lucas was both the greatest gift and the most painful reminder of what his choices cost him. He understands that being a father is a privilege that must be earned, not a right that can be demanded. Respectfully, Dr. Sarah Martinez, rehabilitation counselor. Jenny read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in the box where she kept all the legal documents from her divorce. Someday, when Lucas was old enough to ask about his father, she would show him this letter along with all the others. She would let her son decide for himself what kind of relationship, if any, he wanted with John. But for now, Lucas was her priority. Lucas and the life she was building, carefully, deliberately, and on her own terms. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Alan standing on her doorstep holding a bag from her favorite Thai restaurant. "I thought you might be hungry," he said when she opened the door. "And I may have missed you already." Jenny smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "You just left an hour ago." "An hour too long," he replied, kissing her forehead with the casual affection that still surprised her with its simplicity. As they unpacked dinner together, moving around her kitchen with the easy rhythm they'd developed, Jenny felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not the desperate happiness that depended on someone else's choices, but genuine peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, full of people making choices that would shape their futures in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But inside, Jenny Walker was finally home. 18 months after Lucas's birth, Jenny Walker stood in the gleaming kitchen of her new apartment on the Upper West Side, watching her toddler take unsteady steps between the coffee table and Alan's outstretched arms. The space was smaller than the house she'd shared with John, but it felt infinitely larger, filled with laughter instead of silence, honesty instead of deception. "Come on, buddy," Alan encouraged, his voice warm with affection as Lucas wobbled toward him with determined concentration. "You've got this." Lucas took 3 more steps before tumbling into Alan's arms with a delighted squeal. At 18 months old, he was walking with increasing confidence, babbling in what sounded like complete sentences to his own ears, and charming everyone he met with his bright smile and curious nature. "Dada," Lucas announced, patting Alan's face with sticky fingers. Jenny's breath caught. It wasn't the first time Lucas had called Alan Dada, but it still sent a complex mix of emotions through her chest. Joy, because her son was bonding with a man who genuinely loved him. Guilt, because somewhere in a minimum security prison, John was missing these precious moments. And relief because Lucas would never have to wonder if his father figure would choose him over someone else. Alan caught her expression and set Lucas down gently. "Hey, little man, why don't you show Mommy how well you can stack your blocks?" As Lucas toddled off to his toy corner, Alan moved to Jenny's side. "You okay?" "I keep thinking about the timing," she said quietly. "John gets out in 3 months. Lucas is just starting to really talk, to form memories that will stick, and he's calling you Dada." Alan was quiet for a moment, understanding the weight of what she wasn't saying. "Are you worried about confusing him when John wants to start visits?" "I'm worried about a lot of things." Jenny leaned against the counter, watching Lucas concentrate intensely on his blocks. "What if John has changed? What if he hasn't? What if he tries to turn Lucas against you? What if Lucas asks why his real daddy went away? Then we'll handle it together," Alan said simply. "All of it. One day at a time." It was so typically Alan. No grand gestures or dramatic promises, just steady reassurance that whatever came, they would face it as a team. Across town, in a cramped studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen, someone else was thinking about John Walker's impending release. Carrie Miller, now calling herself Caroline Mills, sat at her laptop scrolling through social media posts that chronicled the life she'd been forced to abandon. She'd been back in New York for 6 months, long enough for the heat from the police investigation to die down, but not long enough to feel truly safe. Her 18 months in Miami had been profitable. She'd found 3 wealthy marks and extracted enough money to live comfortably. But she'd grown careless, and her last target had gotten suspicious enough to hire a private investigator. Now she was back where it all started, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her business with John Walker was unfinished. The Google alert on her phone buzzed. Another news article about John's rehabilitation program, this one featuring a quote from his prison counselor about his progress and upcoming reintegration into society. Carrie smiled coldly. The media loved a redemption story, especially when it involved a fallen man learning to take responsibility for his actions. But Carrie knew something the reporters didn't. She knew exactly how to destroy a man's second chance before he even got it. She opened a new browser window and began typing, "John Walker ex-wife, new boyfriend." The search results showed several images from social media. Jenny at a park with Lucas and a tall man with kind eyes. Alan Blake, according to the tagged photos, a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. Carrie studied the images, noting the way Alan looked at Jenny, the easy familiarity between them, the way Lucas reached for him without hesitation. It was nauseating, really. How perfectly they played the happy family. But perfection, in Carrie's experience, was always built on fragile foundations. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, mixed in with the usual bills and catalogs. Jenny almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail, but something about the careful handwriting made her pause. "Mrs. Walker, you don't know me, but I have information about your ex-husband that I believe you need to hear. John Walker is scheduled for release next month, and I'm concerned about what he might do to you and your family. I was involved with John before you discovered his affair. He told me things about you, about his plans for your marriage, that I think you should know before he tries to re-enter your life. If you're willing to meet, I'll be at the Starbucks on Broadway and 72nd Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll be wearing a red scarf and carrying a copy of the New York Times. I understand if you don't trust me, but please consider that I have nothing to gain from lying to you now. Sincerely, someone who wants to help." Jenny read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. Every instinct told her to throw it away, to ignore whatever game this was. But another part of her, the part that had learned to trust her intuition about danger, whispered that she needed to know what this woman knew. She called Washington Reed. "It could be a trap," the lawyer said after she'd read him the letter. "Someone looking to cause trouble or extract money. Or it could be legitimate information that might affect Lucas's safety. What would you do?" "I'd meet her, but not alone, and I'd record the conversation." The Starbucks on Broadway was crowded with the usual afternoon mix of students, tourists, and Upper West Side residents avoiding their apartments. Jenny spotted the red scarf immediately, a woman in her late 20s with auburn hair and nervous energy, clutching a newspaper like a shield. Alan sat 3 tables away, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to avoid being obvious. Washington Reed waited outside in his car, phone ready to call police if the meeting went wrong. "Are you Jenny?" the woman asked as Jenny approached. "I am, and you are?" "Caroline Mills." The name was delivered with practiced smoothness, but Jenny caught the slight hesitation that suggested it wasn't real. They sat across from each other, 2 women whose lives had been shaped by the same destructive man, studying each other with wary curiosity. "I know what you're thinking," Caroline said. "Why should you trust me? Why am I here? What do I want?" "Those are good questions." Caroline pulled out her phone and showed Jenny a series of text messages. "These are from John, sent during our relationship. Read them." Jenny scrolled through the messages, her stomach churning with each revelation. John complaining about her weight gain during pregnancy. John mocking her trust and naivety. John discussing plans to hide assets before filing for divorce. John expressing resentment about being trapped by her pregnancy. "He was going to leave you," Caroline said quietly. "Before you found out about us, he was already talking to a lawyer about minimizing what you'd get in a divorce settlement." Jenny set the phone down with shaking hands. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because he's getting out of prison in 6 weeks and he's been writing letters to mutual acquaintances, asking about you, about your new boyfriend, about Lucas." Caroline leaned forward, her voice urgent. "He's not the reformed man the newspapers are writing about. He's angry, and he blames you for destroying his life. What exactly are you warning me about?" "I think he's going to try to take Lucas from you. I think he's going to claim that you're an unfit mother because you're living with a man you're not married to. I think he's going to use every legal trick he can find to hurt you the way he believes you hurt him." Jenny felt cold despite the warm cafe. "And you know this how?" Caroline's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. "Because I taught him how to be vindictive, and now I'm trying to undo some of the damage I caused." The admission hung between them like a confession. Whatever Caroline's real name was, whatever her real motives were, Jenny believed this one truth. The woman sitting across from her understood exactly how dangerous John Walker could be, because she had helped make him that way. The family court building on Center Street looked imposing in the gray December morning light, its limestone facade weathered by decades of bitter custody battles and broken families. Jenny Walker adjusted her navy blazer and took a steadying breath as she climbed the steps with Washington Reed at her side. It had been 3 months since John's release from prison, and true to Caroline's warning, he had immediately petitioned for full custody of Lucas. His legal argument was predictably manipulative. Jenny was an unfit mother who was exposing their child to an unstable living situation by cohabiting with a man she wasn't married to. "Remember," Washington said quietly as they approached the courtroom, "he's going to try to provoke you. That's his strategy. Make you look emotional and unstable while he plays the reformed father who just wants what's best for his son. Jenny nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her purse. Inside was a folder containing Caroline's evidence, the text messages revealing John's true intentions, the financial records showing his planned deception, and most damning of all, a recording Caroline had made of John discussing how to manipulate the custody system to hurt Jenny. "Is Alan here?" Washington asked, waiting in the gallery. "I wanted Lucas to stay with my sister today, away from all this." They entered the courtroom to find John already seated at the plaintiff's table with his new attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Victoria Stern who specialized in high-conflict divorces. John looked different, thinner, more carefully groomed, wearing a conservative suit that probably cost more than he should have been able to afford on his current salary as a paralegal. When he saw Jenny, John's expression shifted into what she now recognized as his performance face, the carefully constructed mask of wounded sincerity he'd perfected during their marriage. The Honorable Judge Patricia Delacroix entered, and Jenny felt a small surge of relief. Judge Delacroix was known for her no-nonsense approach to custody cases and her ability to see through parental manipulation. "Mr. Walker," Judge Delacroix began, consulting her notes, "you're petitioning for full custody of your 18-month-old son, Lucas. You've been out of prison for exactly 93 days after serving 6 months for breaking and entering, stalking, and violating a restraining order against the child's mother. Help me understand why you believe this is in Lucas's best interest." Victoria Stern stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client has completed extensive rehabilitation programs including anger management, parenting classes, and financial responsibility counseling. He's maintained steady employment and stable housing. Meanwhile, the child's mother is living in an unmarried relationship, exposing Lucas to an unstable family structure. And you believe prison was a more stable environment than a loving home with his mother?" Judge Delacroix's tone was dry. "Your Honor, Mr. Walker has paid his debt to society and demonstrated genuine remorse for his past mistakes. He simply wants the opportunity to be a father to his son." Washington stood for Jenny's side. "Your Honor, Mr. Walker's pattern of behavior suggests this petition is motivated by revenge rather than paternal concern. We have evidence that he planned to abandon his family before Mrs. Walker discovered his affair, and that he's using this custody claim as a weapon to continue his harassment." John's carefully controlled facade cracked slightly. "That's not true, Your Honor. I made mistakes, yes, but I love my son. I want to provide him with stability and—" "Mr. Walker," Judge Delacroix interrupted, "I haven't asked you to speak yet." Washington continued, "Additionally, Your Honor, Mr. Walker has made no attempt to establish a relationship with his son through appropriate channels. He hasn't requested supervised visitation, hasn't paid child support, and hasn't demonstrated any genuine interest in Lucas's well-being until this custody petition. Is that accurate, Mr. Walker?" Judge Delacroix asked. Victoria Stern answered for him. "My client was advised that attempting contact might be seen as harassment given the previous restraining order. He was being cautious." "Cautious," Judge Delacroix repeated. "Interesting word choice." Washington approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of Mr. Walker's true motivations for this custody claim." He handed the clerk the folder containing Caroline's evidence. As Judge Delacroix reviewed the text messages, her expression grew increasingly stern. "Mr. Walker," she said finally, "these messages suggest you were planning to abandon your wife and unborn child for financial advantage. One message specifically states, and I quote, 'If I file first and claim she's mentally unstable from pregnancy hormones, I can probably get out with minimal alimony.' Is this your writing?" John's face went white. "Your Honor, those messages are taken out of context." "And this recording?" Judge Delacroix activated her computer speakers. John's voice filled the courtroom, tinny, but unmistakably his. "The key is to make her look like the bad parent. If I can prove she's living with some guy she barely knows, putting Lucas in danger, I can get full custody and stick it to her for destroying my career." The silence that followed was deafening. John looked like he was going to be sick. "Mr. Walker," Judge Delacroix said, her voice ice cold, "in 30 years on this bench, I have seen many attempts to manipulate the family court system. This ranks among the most cynical. Victoria Stern made a last desperate attempt. Your Honor, we question the authenticity of this recording. The recording was made by Ms. Caroline Mills, who has provided sworn testimony about its authenticity." Washington interjected. "She's waiting in the hallway if the court wishes to question her." John's head snapped up. "Caroline? What does she have to do with this? Jenny watched as understanding dawned on John's face. Caroline hadn't contacted Jenny to help. She'd contacted Jenny to ensure John's final destruction was complete. Even in her attempt at redemption, Caroline couldn't resist twisting the knife. Judge Delacroix set down the documents. Mr. Walker, not only am I denying your petition for custody, I'm reinstating the restraining order. You are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Walker or your son for a period of 5 years, after which you may petition the court for supervised visitation only. Your Honor, please. Furthermore, you will pay retroactive child support dating from Lucas's birth, plus legal fees for this frivolous litigation. If you violate this order in any way, you will return to prison to serve the remainder of your original sentence. John's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. His face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, a kind of broken recognition that his choices had led him to this moment. Outside the courthouse, Jenny stood in the December wind, feeling strangely empty after her complete victory. Washington Reed was on his phone with reporters, managing the media response to what would inevitably become another cautionary tale about domestic manipulation. Mrs. Walker? She turned to see Caroline approaching, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had in the coffee shop months earlier. I wanted you to know, Caroline said quietly. The recording was real. Everything I showed you was real. I didn't do this to help you. I did it because I needed John to understand what it feels like to lose everything. And now? Now I'm leaving New York. For good this time. Caroline handed her a manila envelope. Bank account information for offshore accounts John never told you about. There's enough there to ensure Lucas never wants for anything. Jenny took the envelope, studying Caroline's face. Why? Because some mistakes can't be undone, but they can be paid for. Caroline turned to go, then stopped. He really did love you, you know, in the beginning. Before I taught him that love was just another game to be won. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd of downtown Manhattan, leaving Jenny with the final pieces of her old life in her hands. That evening, Jenny sat in her living room watching Alan read to Lucas from a picture book about farm animals. Her son was curled in Alan's lap, his small hand resting trustingly on the page as he pointed at the illustrations and babbled his own commentary. "Moo cow," Lucas announced with great satisfaction, patting the picture. "That's right, buddy. Moo cow," Alan agreed, his voice warm with affection. Jenny's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Saw the news coverage. You won everything. How do you feel?" She considered the question as she watched her son and the man who'd chosen to love them both. How did she feel? Not triumphant exactly, not vindicated, just peaceful. She texted back, "I feel free." And for the first time in years, that was completely true. John could never hurt them again. Caroline was gone. The legal battles were over. What remained was the life she'd built from the ashes of her marriage. Honest, loving, and entirely her own. Lucas looked up from his book and reached for her. "Mama!" She scooped him up, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, feeling his sturdy weight in her arms. This was what winning looked like. Not the courtroom victory, but this moment of simple love with her son and the man who'd proven that not all promises were lies. Outside, snow began to fall on the city, covering the old wounds with something clean and new. Inside, Jenny Walker was finally, completely home. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the suburban home in Westchester County, illuminating a kitchen filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Jenny Blake. She'd taken Alan's name 2 years ago in a simple ceremony surrounded by close friends and family, stood at the counter packing lunch boxes while 6-year-old Lucas carefully spelled out words at the breakfast table. "Mom, how do you spell dinosaur?" Lucas asked, his tongue poking out in concentration as he worked on his kindergarten homework. "Sound it out, sweetheart," Jenny encouraged, though she couldn't help smiling at how seriously he took his schoolwork. Lucas had inherited her methodical nature and Alan's quiet determination, along with a curiosity about the world that delighted everyone who met him. "D-I-N-O." Lucas paused, frowning at his paper. "You're doing great," Alan said, emerging from the hallway in his scrubs. He'd been promoted to head nurse in the pediatric ICU at Mount Sinai, a position that required long hours, but filled him with purpose. "What comes after Dino?" "S-A-U-R, Lucas announced triumphantly, then looked up at Alan with bright eyes. "Dad, will you help me with my dinosaur project after school?" "Wouldn't miss it, buddy." Jenny watched the easy interaction between her husband and son, still sometimes amazed by how naturally their family had formed. Lucas had no memory of the upheaval surrounding his birth, no knowledge of custody battles or restraining orders. To him, Alan had always been Dad, and that was exactly how it should be. "Speaking of projects," Jenny said, adjusting Lucas's backpack, "Mrs. Patterson wants to meet with us next week about the gifted program." "Already?" Alan asked, ruffling Lucas's hair. "Seems like yesterday he was just learning to walk." "I'm smart," Lucas stated matter-of-factly without arrogance, simply accepting it as one of many facts about himself, like having brown eyes or preferring chocolate ice cream. "Yes, you are," Jenny agreed, kissing the top of his head. "And kind and funny and perfectly wonderful." As they went through their morning routine, backpack checked, teeth brushed, shoes tied, Jenny felt the deep contentment that had become her baseline emotion over the past few years. This was what happiness looked like, she'd learned. Not dramatic moments of joy, but the steady accumulation of ordinary morning moments with people who loved each other completely. Across town, in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens, John Walker sat at his small kitchen table reading the same newspaper article for the third time. The business section featured a profile of Jenny's financial consulting firm, which had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 12 specializing in divorce asset recovery. The article included a photograph of Jenny at a charity event, radiant in a simple black dress, standing next to a man identified as her husband, Alan Blake. They looked happy in a way that made John's chest ache with regret, and something that might have been envy. He'd tried to rebuild his life after the courthouse humiliation 5 years ago. He'd completed his parole, worked steadily as a paralegal, even attended therapy to address what his counselor called his patterns of manipulation and entitlement. But every attempt at a new relationship had ended the same way, the women eventually discovering his history and deciding they deserved better, which John had finally admitted to himself. They did. His phone buzzed with a reminder. Luke's 7th birthday, supervised visitation request deadline. John stared at the notification for a long time. Next month, Lucas would turn 7, and the restraining order would expire. He would legally be allowed to petition for supervised visits with his son, a boy who wouldn't remember him, wouldn't know his voice, wouldn't have any reason to want a relationship with the stranger who'd contributed DNA but nothing else to his life. He could file the paperwork. He could force his way back into their lives, create confusion and complications for a child who was thriving without him. He had that right, legally speaking. But for the first time in his adult life, John Walker chose to consider someone else's needs before his own. He deleted the reminder without filing any paperwork. That afternoon, while Lucas was at school and Alan was at the hospital, Jenny sat in her home office reviewing client files. Her business had become exactly what she'd hoped, a way to help other women navigate the financial complexities of divorce while maintaining their dignity and securing their children's futures. Her phone rang with a call from Washington Reed, who'd become both professional colleague and personal friend over the years. "I thought you should know," Washington said without preamble. "John's deadline to petition for visitation passed yesterday. He didn't file." Jenny set down her pen, absorbing the information. She'd been quietly dreading this day for months, preparing Lucas for the possibility that his biological father might want to meet him, consulting child psychologists about the best way to handle the situation. "How do you feel about that?" Washington asked. Jenny considered the question honestly. 5 years ago, she might have felt vindicated, or relieved, or even sorry for John. Now she simply felt peaceful. "I think he made the right choice," she said finally. "For Lucas, for all of us, maybe even for himself." After ending the call, Jenny walked to Lucas's bedroom and stood in the doorway, looking at the bright, cheerful space filled with books and art supplies and pictures of family vacations. On his nightstand sat a photo from their wedding day, Lucas in a tiny tuxedo, beaming as he walked down the aisle carrying their rings, with Alan and Jenny watching him with expressions of pure love. This was their family. This was their story, and it was exactly what it was supposed to be. That evening, as they did every Sunday, the Blake family gathered around their dinner table for the weekly tradition of sharing the best part of their week. Lucas always went first, his 6-year-old enthusiasm making everything sound like the most exciting adventure imaginable. "The best part of my week was when Tommy Martinez threw up during story time and I got to help Mrs. Patterson clean it up," he announced proudly. Alan laughed. "That's very helpful of you, buddy. What about you, Dad?" "The best part of my week was watching you figure out that math problem yesterday. You didn't give up even when it was hard." Lucas beamed, then turned to Jenny. "Your turn, Mom." Jenny looked around the table at her husband and son, at the life they'd built together through choice rather than obligation, through love rather than duty. The best part of my week, she said, is right now, this moment, with both of you. That's cheating, Lucas protested with a grin. You can't say the same thing every week. Can't I? Jenny asked, reaching over to tickle him until he dissolved into giggles. Outside, the sun was setting over their quiet suburban street, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside, the Blake family finished their dinner, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and settled into the evening routine that would carry them safely into tomorrow. It was an ordinary Sunday in an ordinary house with an ordinary family. It was absolutely perfect, and somewhere in Queens, John Walker turned off his lights and went to sleep, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation. This one ended with something better: acceptance, healing, and the hard-won wisdom that not every mistake can be fixed, but every day offers the chance to make better choices, the choices that truly matter. Based on the entire development of the script, what was the exact moment when Jenny Walker ceased to be a betrayed wife and definitively became a woman who had completely regained her personal power and self-esteem? I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.